Okay, so this video might get me kicked off YouTube, but hopefully it doesn't. Your emotions are a weakness, the raw truth. So in this video, I'm going to explain why emotions are a weakness, and a lot of people are going to hate this immediately. Just hear me out, because I'm probably not going to say what you think I'm going to say. Let's get into it. So, emotions, good or bad? Modern society does prescribe, and I think everyone watching this will probably agree with me, modern society prescribes being more emotional as the cure for everything. We say, you know, as a random example, men should cry more, or that's just one example. And we also say that being emotional kind of equates to emotional intelligence. People who cry more and are more in touch with their emotions and are less, disciplined or not, like ignoring their emotions, etc. We say that's a good thing and that's emotional intelligence. And I think that isn't true. There's aspects to that which I can agree with a bit, and we'll talk about that in a second. But the first thing I want to lay down in this video is that being emotional doesn't equal emotional intelligence. Being more emotional and just obeying your emotions, crying, and a bunch of different things is largely not a good thing. And we'll get into the nuances of when it's okay, when it's not okay. But I think a lot of people have a very bad understanding of how emotions work and how to deal with emotions. And so what they do is they basically are fed the modern narrative of you need to obey your emotions, not just listen to them, but obey them. And if you don't, it's bad for your mental health, etc. And that's because most people are incredibly unskilled when it comes to this. And we're not taught it in school, even though we probably should be. So here's the reason why I think obeying your emotions, and I'm going to use the word obey and listen differently because they're two different things. The reason obeying your emotions doesn't equal emotional intelligence is because not all of your emotions are actually good for you and they shouldn't be listened to. So for example, some emotions, when you obey them, can result in bad decisions. They can result in instant gratification. If you don't know what that means, hit the subscribe button, but I've already talked about it in another video. Instant gratification is basically things that give you like a boost of dopamine right now, but they're not particularly good for you. So for example, junk food, Netflix, scrolling on social media, I guess you could say hard drugs as well, but that's a bit more extreme. Anything like that that isn't good for you in the long run, but it gives you a boost now and it's attractive to do. These are things that your emotions will compel you to do. It's not logical. You don't logically go, yes, I'm going to eat this chocolate bar for the nutrient dense boosted life expectancy. Like, it's not logical like that. You eat it because you feel like it, and that's because you listen to your emotions. It also can lead to zero purposeful work, and by that I mean your emotions can trick you into not wanting to pursue a purpose, particularly fear, which we'll talk about in a second. And it can also lead to life crises, both through causing you to do things that lead to these things, or just by making you like not think clearly. And we will talk about all this in this video, but you can probably understand from the examples I've just gave. If you're still watching the video at this point, you're obviously an intelligent person, and you can see from the examples I just gave that these things are all emotional. None of those things I just listed are logical, and they are things that happen because people obey their emotions. So you would agree with me now if I said that some emotions are good, some emotions are bad, and the bad emotions should probably not be listened to. Someone who listens and obeys bad emotions that get them to do bad things, for example, they feel like being lazy when they know they have a deadline to work towards, and so they obey that emotion. That doesn't make them emotionally intelligent. That actually means they lack emotional control because they are compelled to obey this emotion. So the correct answer to whether or not emotions are good or bad, the answer is actually emotions are powerful because they can make people do things even if they aren't logical. So emotions are powerful. They're not good or bad. It just depends on the emotion. Some are good, some are bad. It's people that are unskilled. So it's not that the emotions are necessarily, they don't really compel you to do things, they more persuade you, and people who are unskilled are very impressionable from that persuasion, we could say. So the skilled person, the actual definition of emotional intelligence, in my opinion, isn't what we just talked about. The skilled person is able to recognize emotions, use them as fuel when necessary to do things that are actually good for them. They show discipline against negative emotions. They retain control over their emotional state. They can understand where emotions come from and how to, because emotions are actually symptoms, they're not the cause of anything. They're the symptoms of something else. And they can also practice self-love and high self-esteem. That is a skilled person. Everything I just, in the bold down the bottom of this screen that I just read, those are things that people should be able to do. That is actual emotional intelligence in a skilled person. Not people who, cry. Obviously, when I say cry their eyes out, yes, if something bad happens, of course, that's absolutely okay if something terrible's happened. I'm just saying people that shriek, cry, carry on for no reason at all, they're not emotionally intelligent at all, not in any way whatsoever. So Here's where we should be at this point in the video. If you've watched so far, just to summarize my points, I'm saying emotions aren't necessarily bad or good. They're a weakness because they're powerful, and it's actually the people that are the problem, because most people are unskilled when it comes to dealing with emotions, and that's what we're about to talk about. But I just want you to understand, because someone's gonna report this video and say it's hateful and that kind of thing. I'm not saying emotions are bad and you have to be completely not listening to your emotions at all. I actually preach listening to your emotions. Some people will say you should do everything your emotions say. Other people will say you should never listen to your emotions. Actually, both of those things are wrong. You should listen to your emotions, but you just shouldn't obey them. If you think about the best swimmer possible, they can feel the waves when they're swimming in the ocean, right? They're not completely oblivious to waves, but they also don't have to follow their path. If they get hit by a tough wave, they don't have to, over-exaggerate the fall. They're actually able to anticipate the wave. They're able to move around it, etc. That's what you should be. You should be able to feel the waves, but also be an adept swimmer and be able to navigate the waves. And the waves are, in this analogy, are your emotions. That is what I believe. There's a clear difference between listening to your emotions and obeying your emotions. You should listen. You shouldn't obey all the time. You should be able to obey when it's good for you. So I'm in the middle on this. I'm not actually far on one side saying you should not listen to your emotions at all. And I think if you watch until this point in the video, you can probably see that I'm actually not a dick. I'm a reasonable person, and I'm actually a switched on person compared to a lot of people. So the key to emotional intelligence is control. And this is why I cannot stand people saying emotional intelligence is being emotional, particularly not so much with women. I think it's mostly with men, where people preach being more emotional as the solution to mental health problems and that kind of thing. That isn't the solution to mental health problems. The only thing in that regard you should be preaching is listening to your emotions and taking action on your emotions, either obeying them if they're good, or figuring out where they're coming from if they're bad, and addressing the problem. That is what we should be preaching. You should never preach people to cry more as a solution. That doesn't help anyone, particularly, I think, men. We say these things a lot in society. It doesn't actually help, and it certainly isn't helping, because we cry the most we've ever cried in human history. But here are, in my opinion, the 5 main rules of emotional mastery, and if you can do all of these things as I try and do them, you will find that you're actually a way more productive person, and you are a lot happier overall. You don't feel like shut in or anything like a lot of people would preach. You feel constrained and blocked off to the world if you don't listen to your emotions. We're not talking about that at all. So the first rule of emotional mastery is to recognize the cause. As I said before, emotions aren't the cause, they're the symptom. If you have an emotion, it's because of something. If you feel lazy, it's because of something. If you feel fear, it's because of something. And the reason recognizing the cause is important goes back to the first thing we said in this video, which is that emotions can be good or bad. In fact, emotions are just powerful. That's the reality. They're not good or bad. So when you're able to recognize the cause of emotions, you actually have a lot more control over yourself. I'll put it into an example, because I think examples are easy to understand. This morning, I went through a period of maybe 1 to 2 hours where I didn't feel particularly productive. I didn't really want to do anything, and an emotionally unskilled person would probably obey those emotions. Someone else might try and force themselves through it, and that can occasionally work if it's the right thing to do. It wasn't the right thing to do this morning, just to kind of be an idiot and force myself through it. So what I instead did was, because I'm an emotionally skilled person, I thought about why I feel lazy, and I realized the reason I feel lazy this morning is because I didn't actually plan today out. I'm supposed to every night plan the next day. I didn't plan today out from last night, so I had no actual plan to do. I have a few things that need to be done, but because I've procrastinated them a little bit in the previous few days, like I haven't filmed as many YouTube videos as I was supposed to, this made me feel a little bit unhappy because I hadn't lived up to the expectations, and because I felt unhappy, my brain, the bad side of my brain, tried to trick me into being lazy and pursuing instant gratification, as we talked about before, as a means of raising my dopamine levels and making me feel happier. And then also, even though that wouldn't actually make me feel happy, but you know what I mean if you're watching until this point. And then also, I just felt a little bit down in that, because like the last video, for example, that I put on YouTube only got 22 views, which is pretty bad compared to normal. But then I also, the logical part of myself told myself I'm making videos in a new style, and so that's going to happen for, the first few videos until I get one that pops off, and then we'll be back to where we were before. So I'm able to unpack the reasons behind me feeling lazy. And just to summarize that, the reason I felt lazy was because my brain tried to trick me into avoiding work, because me thinking about work that this morning was making me feel a little bit unhappy, and it instead tried to move me towards instant gratification and things that are going to raise my dopamine. Because I'm logical, I realized that was what was happening, and I went back to work and told myself, this will work, it has worked before, I just need to do the work to a high quality standard, and then I can have everything I want and I can make progress towards my goals, my ambitious goals that I've made a lot of progress towards, and that made me feel better. It put a little bit of drive back into me. I imagined, the enormous amount of people I'd be helping with making videos like this, because even if this video gets 10 views now, once I have 1 million subscribers, obviously all your videos are going to have, at least 10,000 views, absolute minimum. So that's what I thought about, and that made me feel better. And so I recognized this cause and I was able to deal with that. We spent a bit of time on number one, but it was number one for a reason. So the actionable step to take away from number one here is to understand where your emotions come from. A little other tip I'll give you, which is something I like to do, is what I call the hyper emotional state. So a little thing I do when I'm in a particularly emotional state, like maybe I'm feeling down, I've had a few underperforming videos as a random example, something like that happens where I'm feeling this isn't working, or maybe I have a bad day because of another reason, anything like that. What I do is I like to tell myself, sometimes even out loud, I'm in a hyper emotional state right now. I just say that. And once you actually put that into the physical world, it's so much better, because you realize all the decisions you're making right now, they actually come from a place of emotion, because you're in a highly emotional mood. So I would recommend that for anyone. When you feel down, or you feel like you're losing hope in, maybe you're working on a project like I am, and it just like you've have a few days or maybe weeks of it not going particularly well, and you feel a little bit down, which is completely normal. That's not unusual. Instead of beating yourself up, just tell yourself, I'm in a hyper emotional state right now. Say that to yourself, because it's the truth. And once you actually put that into the physical world, it's much easier to make progress, because you can start making decisions from a logical point of view, and you can journal and figure out what's causing the unhappiness and start to make plans to move towards your goal and think rationally. Rational thinking will save you. Emotional thinking will doom you further. So that's number one, recognize the cause. The second rule of achieving emotional mastery is emotional charge. So emotional charge is kind of like a battery, where you have a positive and a negative side of a battery. As far as emotions are concerned, there are positive and negative emotions, and you need to be able to know which is which. So for example, if you feel lazy and you feel like pursuing instant gratification and avoiding work, that's an example of negative emotions, because they're trying, if you obeyed these emotions, they would put you in a worse spot in life. That is how you tell whether an emotion is negative or positive. If this emotion is going to put me in a worse spot logically, it's negative. If I have the emotion, for example, I'm absolutely pumped to get out of bed and go for a run this morning or something like that, that's a positive emotion, because it's improving my life and I'm going to enjoy myself, and I should listen to that emotion. So you're able to tell what emotions are good or bad for you through sheer logic and just being a person with emotional mastery. And the thing about telling which emotion is which, the thing about being able to see the charge of each emotion and what is more like, sorry, I zoned out for a second. I was trying to think about what to say. The thing about telling whether an emotion is positive for your life or negative for your life gives you complete control about what to do, because you can obey the positive emotions. Those are the emotions you should obey, and you can listen to the negative emotions, as we just said in number one, figure out where they're coming from and address those problems and turn them into positive emotions. So in actuality, you're using your emotions much like an expert swimmer uses the current and waves to actually help them. You just don't have to obey your emotions constantly. The third rule of achieving emotional mastery, in my opinion, is to retain logic, and logic generally means what is going to be good for you, particularly in the future. So a lot of people, and when I say a lot of people, I mean everyone, they don't actually they don't think logically at all when they're emotional. And this is another reason why I told you to say I'm in a hyper emotional state when that is the case. But the reason retaining logic is important is because logic is not, you can still be wrong about things, but generally when you're logical, you're actually quite intelligent. You're able to make plans that'll lead to your goals. Whereas when you're in an emotional mood and you, for example, feel down because the project you're working on isn't going particularly well, your emotions will tell you to abandon work, which is not going to help you achieve your goals at all, and it's not going to bring you fulfillment, and to pursue instant gratification, which is going to further make you feel unhappy. Whereas you can clearly see the difference between that. If you're able to unpack where the emotions come from and be logical, it's much easier to make progress towards a goal rather than losing logic and not thinking about the future at all. So that's rule number 3. Rule number 4 is discipline is a superpower. Although I did say at the start of the video, it probably sounded like I hated discipline. That's not true at all. I love discipline. The reason I said pushing through emotions with discipline was the wrong thing for me to do this morning is because that's not actually discipline. That's called being deaf. That's not listening to your emotions at all. You should listen to your emotions, as I did. You should just show emotional mastery and be able to actually change your emotions and figure out where they're coming from, etc. The reason discipline is a superpower is because there's going to be times, and I could use a gym analogy, and maybe you don't feel like going to the gym, where your emotions aren't on your side. And even if you can actually motivate yourself and make yourself feel like going, you do need to kickstart it with a bit of discipline. Just like how you can turn a car on and run it on fuel, but it still needs a battery to start it. Sometimes telling yourself logically, in the example of you don't feel like going to the gym, telling yourself this is going to benefit me and this is what I want to do, and thinking about the future rather than the present, thinking about the benefits this will give me from the future, that might be enough to get you halfway into the gym. And then the other half is you just use discipline and you just muscle yourself into the gym. And through that combination, that's like the battery, which it starts a spark, and that starts a chain reaction that starts a car. And then once you've actually started in the gym for 5 minutes, maybe you actually feel motivated and your emotions are back on your side again. That's what I mean by discipline is a superpower. It's extremely important. The more discipline you can show, the happier and more productive you'll be as a person. And that's a very important part of emotional mastery, particularly when you're feeling extremely negative emotions, maybe feelings of like, what's an example? I guess most people aren't violent, but everyone to some extent feels like extreme anger at a person. This can be very destructive because what you end up doing is you give them, rent-free space in your head. You're constantly thinking about them, and because your brain can't really tell the difference that much between what you're thinking about and what you're seeing in front of you, that's why when you have a nightmare, your heart is racing. When you're constantly thinking about this person, you're constantly ready for a threat because you're identifying them as a threat and you're constantly thinking about them. And also, it's just frustrating to constantly think about things where, I don't know what, if someone was rude to you, I don't know what exactly they did. Maybe they took away your agency, and so you're thinking about that. That's stressing you out. All these other things. Discipline is extremely important because you can stop yourself from thinking about that and actually maybe feel sorry for the person. That's a great way to deal with anger. And also just to avoid that person. It's funny because when you're angry at someone, as an example, you often tend to chase instant gratification to make yourself feel better and to think about, ways you can wrong that person. And what that actually does is it takes away from the true way to, become a better person, which is to work on yourself. And funnily enough, that's the best revenge at all. If you worked on yourself instead of fuming about someone, what would actually happen is you would become a way better person, and their life would seem a lot worse compared to yours in comparison because you've worked on yourself that much more. So that's another reason discipline is a superpower. The 5th thing is practicing self-love. And no, self-love isn't constant instant gratification where you're just sitting on the couch watching Netflix eating junk food. That's not self-love. You could say that's a rare treat. If you've been particularly productive, that's, I guess, okay. But self-love is actually about, valuing yourself highly, not in an egotistical, narcissistic, or unrealistic way, but you should value yourself highly. And if you don't, you need to start working on your purpose and stacking achievements to become a more highly valuable person. I'll link that video in the description if you want to work on your purpose. But if you don't value yourself highly, that is because of 2 things, really. It's because of perception and because of achievements. If you have achievements but you don't perceive them because perhaps you're suffering from mental health issues, or maybe you just don't even think about the good things you've done, you have a very bad mindset, then you need to actually fix your mindset and how you perceive yourself. If you have a fine mindset but you just haven't really achieved anything, well, the reason you don't value yourself highly is because you haven't actually done anything. You've never helped anyone. Well, obviously you have, but you haven't intentionally gone out of your way to work on something that'll help people. You haven't done anything, you haven't showed that much courage when you were afraid and achieved something, wonderful. You haven't done any of these things, which it's going to mean that you don't really have anything to look on that you've achieved. And so that's why I'd recommend, again, you start working on your purpose. The solution is the same. You start making progress in life. So I hope these 5 rules were useful for you guys. I do my best to live by them every single day, and they've served me well. And if you can take away anything from this video, I'd feel happy and satisfied that I've helped you. But guys, that is the video. Hit the subscribe button. Definitely check out my video on purpose. Feel free to comment below if you want to talk to me about anything, and have a good one.